to say Winston's the only reason I got through my PhD. If it weren't for Winston being the lead of our study group and finding all of the answers to the physics questions in the library, there's no way I would have gotten through that program. So I'm going to talk today about 100% renewables, and I want to frame this in the spirit of two energy system transformations that I think need to happen to get us there. So a couple months ago, Google announced that they were 100% renewables. And this is a great thing, because they got 2,600 megawatts of wind and solar plants installed, and this reduces carbon emissions, this reduces costs for everybody, this enables governments to increase targets for renewable energy. So it was a great thing. But what if everyone were to go 100% renewables in the same way? And I'm just curious, who here is 100% renewables? Anyone got PV on their roof or buy wind power? Yeah, so there's some folks here who also do. And that's similar to us. If everyone goes 100% this way, the grid as we know it today wouldn't work. And this sort of illustrates that. What this is showing is the solar shape and our typical load shape. This is out west. And what you can see is that the grid is actually acting like a giant battery. So in the middle of the day, the solar on our roof, there's too much power, we export that to the rest of the grid. And in the evening, when there's no solar, we import power from the grid, and that's probably coal power. I live in Colorado, so it's probably coal, it might be gas. And we know what it takes to integrate renewables at this level. We know that we can install storage, and that can shift generation to meet demand, but storage is still kind of expensive. And we know that we could try to move demand to meet generation. So you could move when you run your washing machine or when you run your dishwasher, but obviously you can't really move when you turn on your lights or when you turn on your stove. And then we know that interconnecting, the more we can interconnect across different regions, think about wind coming through regions. It's windy in some places, it's not windy in others. Think about the fact that when there's peak demand here in Boston, it's say 6 p.m., it's 2 p.m. in California, and you can use solar energy from other places that are still peaking. So there's interconnection with other regions that can help you get diversity in wind and solar and hydro resources. But we think it's time, this didn't work out at all. Anyway, we think it's time to take this conversation to the next level. To the next level, and what I mean is that instead of just thinking of what does it take for me to buy energy, renewable energy equivalent to my annual energy use, what is it going to take for all of us to go 100% renewables? What's that going to look like? What does it take to get there? And I think we have two big opportunities here. The first big opportunity is with energy systems integration. So if you think about it, we don't want renewable energy for renewable energy's sake. It's not about, I want wind because I want to install wind. It's about carbon reductions. So I know you probably can't see this. This is a Sankey energy flow diagram. On the left are all the energy sources. So you've got solar, nuclear, hydro, wind. This blue part's natural gas. The black part here is coal. There's biomass, and this green part here is petroleum. And then on the right are energy end-use sectors. So we've got residential, commercial, industrial, and transportation. And this orange part here is electricity generation. And we know now how to clean this part up. We think we've got a pathway forward to clean up electricity generation. And this part here, this blue part of natural gas flows, a lot of this is for heating in your home and commercial buildings and industrial facilities and for process heat. The petroleum piece, obviously for transportation. Electrifying these heating and these transportation pieces can then help move that into this orange box, which we think we know how to clean up. And so, and this slide didn't work out either, but we know how to electrify and how to clean up the electrification piece. And so that's one reason to move to energy systems integration. The second reason to move to energy systems integration is that from the perspective of a utility where you are trying to integrate variable renewables like wind and solar and hydro, they're moving around throughout the day and throughout the year, we need flexibility on the system. And where are we going to get that flexibility? We're hoping to get it from these heating pieces and these transportation pieces. Because like I said, you can't shift when you use your stove, but you can shift when you charge your electric vehicle, and you might be able to preheat your electric water heater during the day when you have excess solar, and then that water heater is ready to go in the evening when you're cooking and you're cleaning and everyone wants to take a shower. So, I don't want to say that we want to get rid of fuels altogether. In fact, what we want to do is we want to start making fuels. And the reason why is because if you actually look at the wind and solar resources and the hydro resources of the US, they tend to peak compared to load in the spring. We've got a lot of excess energy in the spring when there's a lot of hydro runoff and there's not much load. And then in the summer, when there's a lot of air conditioning demand, the load overwhelms even the fact that there's a lot of solar output. And because of that, we need to move to seasonal storage. We need to be able to move energy from those high excess months in the spring to those months of need in the summer. And what we think might help get us to this seasonal storage piece is this idea of power to X, basically creating fuels for long-term storage. So as you know, electricity plus water equals hydrogen. So you can use this hydrogen directly in a gas turbine, you can use the hydrogen in a fuel cell, you can make methanol, you can make methane, you can make all of the fuels that you're used to. We're still not sure yet which makes the most sense given the existing infrastructure and which is going to be the most cost competitive. So there's still a lot of work to be done in this area. But generally speaking, a lot of the studies are showing we think we can get to that 80% with what we've got today at reasonable cost, but to get that last 20%, we're going to need some kind of seasonal storage. And because we're not exactly sure how to do that today, we need to still work on a lot of potential areas in the way of fuels. And we have storage today. We've got battery storage, we've got pumped hydro storage, we've got significant amounts of pumped hydro storage across the United States. It was installed to deal with the nuclear fleet that we installed back in the 70s. But that's not going to be sufficient for the seasonal piece that we're going to need in the future. All right, so I want to then talk about a second energy systems transformation, and this is around inverter-based resources. So how many people here are course 6? Anybody? Oh yeah, course 6 people. So, and was anybody here a power engineer? Nobody, yeah, right. So I didn't even know what power engineering was when I was at MIT, because we were all like analog or digital, designers, or VLSI, or digital signal processing, or something like that. It turns out that people haven't studied power engineering for years, and we actually have a dearth of folks in this profession. We're kind of always scrambling to try and find people who are trained in this, because we have not done a very good job of educating people in this particular discipline of electrical engineering. But the point here is that wind and solar and batteries and fuel cells, flywheels, supercapacitors, all this stuff is coupled to the grid through an inverter, through a DC to AC converter. And it turns out that you can have a moderate annual average of renewable energy on your system, and that can translate to really high instantaneous hourly penetrations of inverter-based generation. So what I mean by this is Colorado, where I live. And for the last couple of years, this green line is showing the annual average wind and solar penetration on our system is 25%. So on an average basis, 25% of our load comes from wind and solar. And what that means is that there's months when 33% of the energy comes from wind and solar. And what that means is that there's hours when up to 71% of the energy comes from wind and solar. And in Colorado, we can manage those instantaneous averages because we're coupled to a giant grid. But there are places like Ireland that cap their amount of wind and solar that can be accepted onto the system, and they won't allow this much to be accepted on the system because the grid needs to be able to recover if there's a big event, like you lose a large generator, you lose a large transmission line, and there are some things that can happen that make it difficult to have very high penetrations. And I'm going to talk about that next. So the thing to note is that the whole power system that we have today was basically designed around characteristics of your conventional steam and gas turbines. So they say the grid is the world's biggest machine. It's because all the generators are spinning synchronized all the way from Florida up through Maine, and they're all rotating in unison. And as you know, conservation of energy, all the power you generate is got to equal all the power that's consumed. And when this is happening, we're running at 60 hertz. Now, if a generator trips offline in Florida, you know instantly in Maine. And you know that because all the generators slow down a little bit because of the instantaneous power imbalance. And when they slow down, that means frequency drops from 60 hertz. And this red line is showing, it drops 59.99, 59.98. And as that frequency drops, that's a signal to all the generators. We use this as a communication device to tell them all to increase their power output a little bit to make up for the fact that we just lost a generator. Now all these generators, these conventional generators, they're all electromechanically coupled to the grid. And we don't want this frequency to drop too low. So if this goes too low, emergency procedures will kick in and we'll start blacking out parts of the grid to try and do an emergency restore power balance. Now you can imagine when you replace some of these conventional coal and steam gas turbines with inverter-based generation with wind and solar and batteries, you have less inertia on the system. And frequency drops really fast, as shown by this blue line. And you have less time to recover the system. And this is why utilities, this is one of the reasons why utilities have challenges with renewables, why they don't like renewables. But the thing to note is that it's because we're thinking about the entire problem from the perspective of conventional generators. What we need to do is to think about it from the perspective of these new resources. These new resources are super fast. They have a much higher magnitude of response, so you can get much more power output. And they can ride through blips on the system way better because they're not electromechanically coupled. They're coupled through these power electronics. And so this is a huge opportunity to rethink how the grid works. We could today try and take our power electronics and we could try to emulate what conventional generators do. But that would be like driving our Ferrari like a dump truck. These graphics really didn't work out well at all. But anyway, this did say why drive your Ferrari like a dump truck, and that's what it would be like if we were to take our power electronics and emulate synchronous generators. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I said that you know instantly if a generator has gone out up in Maine all the way down to Florida. That's a communication device that we use today. In the future, we're not going to have that kind of communication device. What inverters do is they read frequency and they spit out power at that same frequency. We're going to need to find a new way to do this. And so it may be that we need ubiquitous sensors everywhere and ultra-fast communications across the system to make this work. And this is something that we're still trying to figure out how to manage. Okay. The point of this is that we're in the process of launching a new initiative that's going to look at visions for what 100% renewables look like. I think we could get there today if we wanted to with today's technology, but it would be really expensive. What we're trying to do is to design a system that's going to make sense and fit together in very many ways, because utility planning and operations is pretty complicated and it all needs to hang together. We want to find something that's going to basically get us to major carbon reductions, and we want to find something that's going to be cost competitive at the end of the day and is not going to break the bank. And we think that these two big transformations and really two big paradigm shifts in how we think of the power system and how we design the planning and operations of it are going to help us get there. So thank you very much.